Two, one. Hi, everybody. Got Saad for the Saad Truth, the two sexiest men in Canada speaking to with one another right here, and you'll get the background in a second. I have with you here Lauren Southern. She wrote a book recently, Barbarians: How Baby Boomers, Immigrants, and Islam Screwed My Generation. I'd like to find out about this. Ran in the 2015 federal election under the rubric of the Libertarian Party of Canada. Currently works at the Rebel Media. Perhaps you'll tell us a bit about this endeavor. How you doing, Lauren?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, very good. So I thought we would start with the following. You re you recently officially converted or changed your sex to being a man. And as you know, I score very, very highly in the oppression Olympics and in the victimology poker. But I haven't reached the optimum. And one of the best ways that I could reach the optimum is if also my sexual orientation were different, if I weren't, heterosexual male. Now, by you having become a male, if we were, assuming that my wife, accepts this little deal, if you and I were to have a same-sex union, I would officially be an untouchable victim, correct?
That would be next level. But I do need to correct you there. No one changes their gender. I was always a male. I was born a male. I just finally my ID shows my true self.
Got you.
But yes, I think we could probably get a position in Senate or at least get like free housing and some free university from
But
becoming gay lovers.
But seriously, tell us about what you did, because I just today, in preparation for our chat, because a lot of people were making this joke on Twitter, and at first I wasn't exactly sure what it was, although I guess I guessed what it was. Then I went and looked for your clip, so maybe you could tell people who haven't seen it what we're talking about.
Right. So I had this idea for a video to see just how easy it is to change your gender in Canada, because Canada accepts this whole kind of you can be whatever gender you want legally. We'll respect that. In fact, it's in our law with Bill C-16 now. You have to respect it. So I didn't actually think this would work, but I knew in order to change my actual Ontario ID, I had to go to a doctor and get their permission to change my gender, get a doctor to say I was a man. And I wanted to prove just how easy it was. I wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. So I was planning on going to a few clinics to test it out. First clinic I go to, doctor's like, you know what? You're a man. You do your thing. I literally showed up wearing a ball cap with my hair up in it. I have no idea how this doctor said yes, but said, you should be identified as a man. I went to Ontario ID, got my ID officially changed. And when I went there, I was wearing makeup, hair down, and they were like, no problem, sir, you're good. Just a complete denial of reality from the institutions in Canada. It was a pretty phenomenal experience, but now I can go to the bar using my male ID, and I've got my little male doctor's permission slip, and I am a man. I am a man.
So do you think that when you went to see the physician and then went to the governmental body, whatever it was, do you think that the only reason why they didn't sort of, ask you more questions or try to drill down further is that they're so terrified? I mean, they're aware of how politically sensitive this issue has become, and they're just terrified of their shadow, and they just, whatever it is that you want, they will acquiesce without asking questions. I mean, that's got to be the bottom line, right?
Oh, of course. They've been scared into silence. I mean, the doctor was just like, well, I can't deny your reality. I mean, imagine if a doctor said that to someone who is morbidly obese and they were one of these fat positive activists and they were saying, nope, I'm healthy, I'm perfect, that's my reality. And the doctor was like, you're good to go. And they've got blood clots, they've got issues, right? No, a doctor should never say that's your reality and I'm going to accept it because I'm afraid of the backlash. But that's totally what it was.
Well, diabetes is a social construction, right? So that makes perfect sense, correct? Hypertension, it's all part of the patriarchal mechanism to try to oppress people by medicalizing them.
Well, this really goes back to Foucault, doesn't it? Mental illness is a system of oppression made by the powerful to suppress the voices of extremely intelligent and creative people, right? Same goes for gender. It's just another system of oppression. I mean, it's a very paranoid worldview, but it's one that is now held by the majority of people in universities.
So I wanted to know, I mean, we'll drill into all these different, now we talked about sort of the gender pronoun issue, we'll talk about feminism, we'll talk about the castrato-in-chief, Justin Trudeau, we'll talk about all these different things that are happening in Canada, if not in the greater sort of Western context. But first, what I'd love to get into is, what was the impetus for you deciding to put in your voice into this battle of ideas? I mean, you're a young woman, you're probably in your, I don't know, in your mid-20s. A lot of people, I mean, I speak to a lot of, I mean, I meet these people of your age as my students. Many of them would certainly love to participate in the debate of ideas, and yet they feel that they don't have really any forum. There's no way for them to contribute. So of course they might not have a forum that is as big as yours now, but it might still help them. It might embolden them to know how you started on your journey to where you are now.
I would say I started by asking questions. I wouldn't consider myself some sort of intellectual giant or new philosopher of my generation. No, I just asked a lot of questions growing up when I was in university, and to my teachers. And I had a small little radio show at my university that I just debated with a good friend of mine who was a Marxist. And I was just a very, very curious person, and I always have been. I still like to think I ask a lot of questions today. That's really what got me started in all of this, was curiosity and searching for the truth. None of it was me saying, I'm going to get this giant platform on Twitter and do this. No, it was just a lot of asking questions, challenging the narrative, and searching for the truth that got me into this. And eventually Rebel Media picked me up, which was awesome, after I signed up to go and see a conference held by my boss, Ezra Levant, about fossil fuels. I was curious about that. It all came from curiosity, I have to say. All curiosity for the truth. The job I have now came from curiosity about fossil fuels and going to a conference about that and meeting my boss today, right? So I don't know, something we should be doing and something millennials should be doing is asking questions and being curious for the truth. So as long as you've got that and you're willing to put yourself out there and out of your comfort zone, I think a lot of opportunity and a lot of interesting people will be there to meet you.
And I think to add to what you're saying, and to go back sort of to the fact that you've now become officially a male, it takes testicular fortitude to actually put yourself, not only in terms of voicing your opinions, but you actually get out there into the field, in the proverbial viper's den where people are profoundly hostile, and you do this. So I think it takes more than simply intellectual curiosity and a desire for engagement. It actually oftentimes takes quite a bit of courage to face these otherwise very peaceful and tolerant people, right?
Right. There's certainly that. I'm not going to lie. The thing that I kind of blew up for after my Why I'm Not a Feminist video was my slut walk video, where I went and I held up a sign that said there's no rape culture in the West. And I was very nervous. I think I'm physically shaking in the video, as much as I hate to admit that, because the literally shaking thing is kind of a meme now. But no, I was very nervous, and it took that's what I meant by going out of your comfort zone. It's going to be a lot of going out of your comfort zone and maybe asking questions to people who are going to get very angry with you, and make sure to have your camera out, because I spent a lot of time asking questions to professors that would get very angry with those questions, and taught you a lot. And eventually I got a camera there for when I was asking angry people questions, and people quite enjoyed watching that, which got me all of the kind of following I have now, I guess, which is pretty cool. And I appreciate everyone who is sticking around.
So Megan Kelly has just left Fox. Does that mean that you're applying for that position?
Obviously. No, I think Tuck got it, didn't he?
Well, Tucker Carlson got the 7 o'clock spot, but Megan Kelly has the 9 o'clock spot.
No, he got 9 o'clock.
Oh, he did? I guess.
Sure. Yeah. You haven't been paying attention, have you?
Well, you're in the media world. I'm in the academic world, so I think I'll defer to your expertise.
I might be wrong. I was just told that over text or something today. So.
Wow, that's impressive. So maybe you could tell us, since you mentioned Ezra Levant and the Rebel Media, some folks, who certainly the Americans, may not be aware of how Ezra Levant became famous, if not infamous, and then what led him to then found this new media company outside the traditional channels.
Right. So Ezra has been one of the biggest kind of right-wing figures in Canada. I mean, he's friends with and Coulter, all of these different American figures as well. And he probably could have gone to America and been quite successful, but he stuck around in Canada and he started a paper called the Western Standard, which became very popular after he published photos of Muhammad in it, Danish cartoons, and he was brought in front of something called the Human Rights Commission that told him that this was hate speech, and he fought back because he was a lawyer, and he was saying, no, this is my free speech, and doesn't matter what my intent is, I should have the right to publish these cartoons. And throughout his life, he has been fighting from the conservative side of things, especially for free speech in Canada. I can't even remember how many times he's been dragged in front of courts, judges, Human Rights Committee, purely for his criticisms of Islam and criticisms of leftists in Canada. So he's been an amazing, amazing fighter for free speech here in Canada. I definitely suggest people go and check him out and the battles he's had. He's written a lot of books on it, like his book Shakedown. And he's actually, him and another guy, they've actually helped reform Canadian law, or they've been the inspiration for reforming Canadian law when it comes to hate speech laws. So,
well, the clip, sorry, before you go on, the clip that you're referring to in 2008, maybe, I think the original, he published the cartoons, I think, in 2006, but then he was summoned in front of the Alberta Human Rights Tribunal, I think it was maybe a year or two later. That exchange with that particular bureaucrat is on YouTube, and it is just extraordinary because it's difficult to imagine that interaction is actually taking place in a supposedly free country. And I really suggest for everyone who hasn't seen it to check it out. Extraordinary.
I remember watching that the first time. I was shocked. I believe the clip is called "What Is Your Intent?" And the Human Rights Tribunal kind of sits there and they're grilling him about this cartoon he published. It's insane. And they're saying, what was your intent? And Ezra just blows up. He's like, my intent, I don't give a damn. I could have published this purely to make people mad. I could have published this to infuriate the Muslim population in Canada, but it shouldn't matter. My intent does not matter. And he asked them, why would you sentence me if I told you that was my intent? And the lady just sits there, and I might be describing this wrong, but she says something along the lines of, we'll have to see. And Ezra,
well, she seemed overwhelmed. She seemed overwhelmed by his, because she thought he would sort of acquiesce and cower, and it would be sort of a rubber stamp procedure. And then he comes at her like a bulldozer, and I think she was just sort of awestruck by how much alacrity he was, defending his position. So he was at Sun TV, which then was shut down, I guess. I don't exactly remember, on some sort of technicality. They didn't get the right permits, and they didn't get some clearance from the commission. Maybe you could fill us in on that. And that's what led him to sort of go to an alternate medium, right? Right.
I never worked for Sun News. I watched it when I was in university a lot, but it did eventually, I'm fairly certain people weren't very nice to it because of its leanings. It was called the Fox News Canada for a while, but needless to say, it shut down, and out of the ashes like a phoenix came Rebel Media. It started out of Ezra Levant's, I think it was either his living room or something, just an online website that has been up for maybe a year, 2 years now, and is booming with success. I mean, we're shocked how big we've grown just in the short time we've been around, and without having TV and without having mainstream support and without having the funding that media companies like the CBC have, which are a super predator here in Canada. As you know, they get tons of funding and they're allowed to take advertising. So media companies are dropping like flies here in Canada, yet Rebel, being one of the only right-wing sources of media in Canada, lives on.
I don't like that term right-wing, because in a lot of people's minds, that already tars you as, an extremist, irrational, hate-filled, right? So I wonder if in the same way that I despise when the so-called progressives use the term liberal, because I consider myself to be a true liberal, and yet I disagree on countless issues that they espouse. And so, I wonder if ultimately, I mean, I know it's just semantics, but ultimately a lot of people are cognitively lazy. And so if they just hear right wing, then you're the alt-right, you're neo-Nazis, you're hate. So it might be worthwhile to position maybe the network of common sense might be a more tame way to speak of it.
Yeah, I find the issue, of course, you're always going to have the people that just assume instantly you're a neo-Nazi, whatever. But if they don't care to listen to my arguments and are just going to brand me something, I don't care to hear what they have to say. I will never be offended by someone who I don't respect. I'll never be offended by someone who is constantly calling me names if they haven't even stopped to listen to me. They're not worthy of respecting their opinion. And I will say to the us branding ourselves a right wing site, I think it brings a level of honesty, because you have a lot of news sites, especially here in Canada, that just say we're impartial, when they're quite clearly have a bias to one end. We, as much as I quite like people who are impartial, people like Phil DeFranco that I've mentioned before, who's very impartial in his news reporting, we are kind of there to balance the scales of the left-wing commentary in Canada that won't admit it's left-wing. And I wouldn't like for us to try to pretend to be something that we're not, purely to, I don't know, signal that we're some safe, okay organization to be around. I'd rather just be honest.
Fair enough. If you like the appellation, stick to it. We were talking earlier about some of the courage it takes to jump into the viper's den. And you'll correct me if I'm wrong, maybe the most dangerous place where that happened is when you took a little stroll in lovely Europe. I haven't actually watched that clip, but I've heard of it. I think it was in Molenbeek, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Molenbeek in Belgium, filled with all sorts of tolerant, peaceful, lovely immigrants who simply wish to assimilate. Why don't you tell us about that story? And if you have any other stories that are similar from your European tour, please share.
Right. So, man, there were so many stories I could pull from. So Molenbeek specifically, I really went into the heart of the area. If people don't know what Molenbeek is, after there was the Belgian bombings at the train station, yes, they hid two of the bombers in an area called Molenbeek in Belgium, and it is one of the highest Muslim population areas, and it is like a different world. When you enter Molenbeek, it is literally like entering the Middle East. If anything would be called an ethnic cultural enclave, it is Molenbeek. It has done absolutely nothing to assimilate.
A center for cultural enrichment, you mean, correct?
A center for cultural enrichment. Yes, my bad.
Don't be racist. Go ahead.
Anyways, so you enter this area, and it's quite literally an area where terrorists can hide because there's so much sympathy with extremism there. And I was looking around shocked. I didn't believe I went to Europe, first of all, because I wanted to see if a lot of the hyperbole that was coming from the right about all of these women are wearing hijabs and niqabs, yada, yada. I wanted to see if it was true. I wanted to kind of confirm if a lot of the beliefs and things I was reading were true. And it was. I went into Molenbeek, and it was 75% of women that were covered up the entire time. They're the vast majority that were head to toe covered. And the language there, it wasn't Flemish, it wasn't French. They were all speaking Arabic. There wasn't a Belgian or a kind of ethnic European to be seen in this area. And if you speak to them, which I did, they all told me, yes, we support Sharia. Yes, the majority support Sharia. And I asked a lot of them something interesting. And I asked them if this area was a safe place to live. And a lot of them were like, yes, it's fine, it's good. But then I spoke to a shopkeeper who told me they're lying to you. They're lying to you because they've been told to lie to the media when they come here. This is a dangerous place. My shop gets broken into all the time. I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of the religious extremism here. So that was a fascinating interview to do. And we had to leave earlier than I wanted to, unfortunately, because my security that we had with us said, we got to get out of here. It's all men on the streets now. You're not supposed to be out right now as a woman. There were crowds of guys kind of running up to us saying, what are you doing? Why are you looking at us? Are you filming? Yelling at my security in Arabic. I didn't understand what they were saying, but he was like, they could be going back to get weapons. This is a very unsafe area. In fact, I had the nicest security guard. He was amazing. This huge guy. He reminded me kind of, I was going to say the Hound from Game of Thrones, but much more handsome. But he was telling me his friends in Iraq that were doing security work there were calling him and saying, "Stay safe in Molenbeek," because it's so dangerous. But that was my experience in Molenbeek. I can go on about the Calais jungle.
You went? Oh, that's right. You went to Calais. Yes, tell us about that. So first situate where that is for folks who might not know, and then that's an interesting story as well. Go ahead.
Sure. So the Calais jungle it's been a kind of refugee area for a long time in France, but during the refugee crisis, when the floodgates were kind of opened, it became a haven for tons and tons of economic migrants to go and stay. And the idea of Calais is it's right across from England. So a lot of people or migrants like to go to Calais and use that road or highway right by Calais to get their chance to go to England, because a lot of them see London as the final destination for them to live as economic migrants. It was crazy when I walked into actually funny story, getting to the Calais jungle is like a big wasteland just right beside a French city that's just filled with tents, and it's got a wall around it, and there's just guards that stand on the road and they'll tell you, don't go this way when you start driving over there. But we couldn't get a car. We couldn't rent a car to go to the Calais jungle. So we had to get an Uber to the Calais jungle, and we call an Uber, and the guy who shows up picks us up in a freaking Tesla, like a brand new Tesla. And I'm like, great, I'm driving into the Calais jungle in a Tesla. This is just going to be great. So we're driving in there, and of course there's migrants everywhere, like, oh my goodness, what is this? And the police kind of say, go away. And we're like, no, we've got security with us. We walked in, and unlike the media would tell you, it wasn't women. There were no women there. It wasn't children. And it wasn't Syrians. We walked in there and we talked to hundreds of people. Sudanese, I'd probably say the majority. Afghanis, probably second. Just Iran, everywhere but Syria. I found one Syrian while I was there. One Syrian. These were not refugees. These were economic migrants. I spoke to Egyptian guys who were bragging to me about getting passage into Canada as Syrian refugees. It was just a fascinating experience being on the ground there and talking to these people. One guy from Iran was telling me how he was bringing alcohol back to his tent. He had bought some wine down in the city, and he was like, "Shh, don't tell anyone. They'll beat me up because it's haram, and they'll like hurt me and confiscate it, even kill me." They had a church and tons of mosques in this camp here. The Christians were way off in the field, and if you talk to them, they would tell you we're afraid to go to church. They have to have guards when they go to church, and they will be beat up and hurt because they're probably like 1%, if not less, of the camp.
Well, that's happening,
and
by the way.
I was told that there's ISIS in the camp. I was quite frankly just told that there was ISIS in the camp, which was, it was insane. It was an utterly insane experience. Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, I was going to say that that the dynamics between Christians and Muslims in those camps, that story repeats itself in Germany, where a lot of the Christian Syrians that have tried to flee, when they find themselves in these camps, also recount similar stories where they are literally afraid for their lives, because they're obviously in a context where 98% of the folks in there are Muslim, and so, for example, when it comes to sexual violence, all women are at risk, but certainly the ones who are of a religious minority have a bigger target on their heads, which is, of course, very, very surprising, because we keep hearing about how tolerant and peaceful and loving and pluralistic that particular ideology is. So undoubtedly, it must be just because you've been tainted by your racist, bigoted channel that you've looked at it through that lens, correct?
Correct. I'm a bigot. I'm just a bigot. I've never been to these places. It was kind of like the moon landing. We hired a bunch of actors, and we set up the whole scene, and we got them to say they were Christians that were beat up. We got them to say they were fake economic migrants. It was really good. I thought the clip came out well. I don't know. You guys let me know.
Now, both you and I, in different ways, you do skits where you you satirize and you use sarcasm and humor. And of course, I've been doing this for years in my own engagements. I find that it's an incredibly powerful tool to actually use as I like to compare it to the incisiveness of a surgeon's scalpel, right? I mean, it cuts through the bullshit in a very powerful way. I mean, is that what you found, that using oftentimes sarcasm to satirize these insane politically correct positions is actually a very effective communication strategy? What do you think?
Well, absolutely. And certainly to a younger generation
Right.
who unfortunately have the attention spans of goldfish. So it's really hard to keep people interested. I mean, most young people are hardly politically engaged as it is. And if they're going to be, they're certainly not sitting down and reading Wealth of Nations. They're certainly not sitting down and reading Plato. They're going to be watching 2-minute YouTube videos
Right.
from makeup artists that are telling them that feminism is great in a sassy Beyonce style way. So we need to really combat a lot of that with humor from the other end. And there's a lot of people that are doing a great job at that. Like you were saying yourself, you've been trying it and it's really worked for you, and a lot of other political commentators that are doing that now. It's a way to reach out. As much as people may think, oh, you're making a very serious political issue funny. Why are you doing that? We're supposed to be having straight, serious conversations. Well, a lot of this is trying to reach out to a large population that haven't been shown the other side as well. And to do that, you have to make it a little bit appealing. You have to make your ideas
Well, I haven't
something people want to watch.
I have in front of me here, and I had not intended to show this, but do you know what this is? Are you familiar with what this is?
What? I have no idea what that is. I'm sorry.
Well, I am very, very disappointed in you, sir, because this is the very infamous, if not very famous, Aslan-Uygur Decoder 5000. And so what you do is,
Okay.
so for example, if I were to enter, if I say, who committed 9/11, then you go like this, and it opens up, and then I listen, it says the Jews. So Aslan, of course, refers to Reza Aslan and Cenk Uygur. So you need to go back, young man, and pay closer attention to my clips, because I have a series of Aslan-Uygur Decoder 5000. There's even shirts, you know.
Okay.
So check it out, because when it comes to sarcasm,
I will check that out for sure.
it might be difficult to beat that one. So let's move on to other causes célèbres that we've both tackled. Let's do feminism. Of course, I've tackled it in my scientific career, because as somebody who studies evolutionary psychology, you start off with the premise that there are clearly some things that men and women are similar on, other things that men, whatever, are different from women in either direction. And of course, in my case, I use evolutionary psychology. Well, not in my case. The correct framework is to use evolutionary psychology to understand when and why men and women might differ. And in my scientific battles, of course, I've come across all sorts of sort of social constructivists or radical feminists who don't accept the starting premise that men and women might actually have some basic biological differences. And so that's how I originally sort of got into that debate. And then, of course, now I take it in my public engagement. Now, of course, in your case, you also tackle this issue. Tell us about sort of the various strands of feminism that you've tackled in your engagement.
Various strands.
Well, so for example, or different. So, for example, rape culture you've tackled. Well, what under the rubric of this radical feminism have you looked at and engaged?
Right. Well, I guess we can start with rape culture, since
Sure.
that was the big one that I started talking about. And quite frankly, I just didn't see the evidence for it. I don't know if I'm the only one who, in my classroom, decided to look into the statistics on this, where it came from, where the 1 in 4 women will be raped in their lifetime stat came from. Once you get to, like I said, I'm a person who asks questions. I'm a curious person. Why is this happening? Why are so many women being raped? Why are they being assaulted? Where did this stat come from? How did they do the research? Where did they do the research? How many people were tested? Once you ask enough questions, eventually you can only come to one conclusion, and it's that this research is shit, quite frankly. Like, this research is trash. I can't listen to this. And it frustrated me to hear this repeated over and over and over again. And especially to be told over and over and over again that I'm a victim, poor me, woe is me, I'm going to have a hard life, all my male friends are rapists. I mean, I had enough of it. I had enough of it. And I, quite frankly, at that point, didn't care what people thought of me if I decided to point out the reality of the situation.
Now, when you would get blowback, say within your social circle, would it be more the women who would, sort of scoff at your position, or would you also have what I like to call the sneaky fuckers? Do you know what the sneaky fucker is? My viewers already know this.
What's the sneaky fucker?
A sneaky fucker is actually a zoological term. It refers to species where you have males that are of two varieties. In other words, their phenotype, their morphology comes in two types. There's the standard male who looks like a dominant male. Then there is a feminized male who tries to enter the territory that is protected by the dominant male by actually looking like a female. And then the male will let him in, and hence he's a sneaky fucker. So I've proposed the theory. I actually proposed it to someone that, well, I know him very well, but I suspect that you know him too. Jordan Peterson, the professor at University of Toronto, who's the guy who really...
he's a great guy.
He's been dealing with the gender pronoun issue. And I argue that male social justice warriors are, and I mean, it sounds as though I'm joking, but I actually genuinely mean it as a scientific theory to be tested. Male social justice warriors are actually pursuing the sneaky fucker strategy. And so going back
absolutely.
So going back to the question that I asked you, is it more the women who are scoffing at your denial of rape culture, or is it the sneaky fucker white male who's doing that, or maybe both?
Okay. Well, the thing is here, I definitely got more females over social media because I think the sneaky fucker type is more so going to virtue signal when the female he wants to have sex with him, is what I've found. So they're not going to go out of their way in private to get angry at me. It was more definitely women telling me my eyebrows.
You need the audience to signal.
Exactly. I was actually Ubering to the airport, and this guy was in the car with me, and he was like, "Oh, I love your stuff. I love Trump, yada, yada, yada." And then he was telling me how he was going to the anti-Trump protests. And I was like, "Why are you going to the anti-Trump protests in Toronto?" And he's like, "Oh, I've got this super feminist chick that I want to sleep with, and I'm going to go protest Trump, and she'll like it. It'll be great." I was like, what?
My theories are always prophetic.
Yes, I was listening to you say that, and I was like, "That's this kid. Nice guy, but like, come on, dude, come on."
Well, I've got
Do you really want to be accused of rape?
I've got another theory for you, which I think I also mentioned it with Jordan when I chatted with him. I actually think that people, and I'd love to do this study at some point. Maybe I can get a graduate student to collaborate with me on this project. I bet you that if you took photos of men, and just based on their facial morphology, people would be able to assort them as to whether they are sort of the beta social justice warrior type or not, truly just based on their facial morphology. In other words, Navy SEAL types are unlikely to be pursuing that strategy, are unlikely to be holding those positions. So in a sense, you can actually, I mean, speaking of signaling, you can actually tell a lot about a person, including his or her political positions, based on their morphologies. And going back to feminism, you may be aware of this study, and actually I had been sent the paper to review it. I wasn't able to review it because I had other time commitments, but it has since been published. It was a paper that looked at the morphology of female feminists, at a conference on feminism, and they showed that feminists had more masculinized features and actually scored higher on a social dominance scale, like a masculinized social dominance scale. So again, there is scientific proof in this case that, feminists on average, now of course there is lipstick feminism where you have women who are very beautiful who are also radical feminists, but on average that's not the case. Has that been your anecdotal evidence as well?
Well, I mean, I play this game with friends all the time, to be honest. We'll guess an ideology. Usually it's based on what they're wearing is a pretty easy one. It's kind of a cheat because it's like, oh, they have pink hair. Oh, they're wearing like some ridiculous punk hipster clothing. Yes, they're probably an SJW versus, oh, they're wearing a Duck Dynasty t-shirt, right? Probably not going to be an SJW. But totally based on the face. Like I find the guys with the lower brows, stronger jaws, typically not SJWs. Typically more into, I actually think this like higher T kind of guys, less likely to be SJWs. Yeah. There's a thing called, I believe Shuon had coined it, the fish mouth, where they have this weird, they always show their teeth and they look like that, always SJWs. I don't know what's up with it.
I tried to do a fish mouth. There's a clip, a sad truth clip, wherein I am donning a social justice warrior uniform where I actually wear a red wig, and I try to replicate the fish mouth. Clearly, you have not been memorizing my sad truth clips. I am very disappointed in you, sir.
Okay, if you have me back, I will have memorized every single clip, and I'll be referencing all of them, and you will never have to be disappointed in me again.
You are on. Let's move on to, let me see here. Let's talk about the classic sneaky fucker guy, with apologies to Mr. Prime Minister. Let's talk about Hair Boy, or as your boss calls him, I think he was the first to coin, Shiny Pony. Mr. Justin Trudeau. Let's talk about him. What do you think?
Right. What do I think of Justin? Well, he was clearly a nepotistic. The reason he won was because of his father and his hair. And I don't think his party at all. In fact, I know his party, they don't respect him. They just see him as a means of getting into office. And he is, quite frankly, embarrassing my country. Yeah. And his whole party along with him.
You know, I appeared, I obviously make a lot of public appearances, but one of the ones that, with the biggest platforms where I actually addressed the Justin Trudeau issue was a chat I had with Joe Rogan. I don't know if do you know who that is? Yeah. So I was so I was on Joe Rogan, and we were talking about Justin Trudeau, and I asked him what he thought of him, and sort of his first response was, I like this guy, he's a young guy, and so on. He basically had the basic few little snippets on him. He's a nice guy, he's tall, he's young, he, all the sort of the basic physical attributes. And then I sort of drilled down. Hopefully it might have made Joe think. But I think a lot of people are ultimately cognitively lazy. And so they don't sit there and weigh all the depth of every issue and how, right? If a guy looks as though he's the part. I mean, if Justin Trudeau did not have his dad, and if he wasn't good looking, if he wasn't tall, and if he didn't have that hair, he'd have zero chance of winning, because it's difficult to imagine. And people think that I'm engaging in hyperbole when I say this, but I truly mean this, that if I took the absolute dumbest student that I have ever had in 22 years as a professor, that student would be substantially smarter than Justin Trudeau. And I mean that literally. I'm not engaging in hyperbole. And yet, 39% or whatever it was voted for him. How do you explain it? Is it just that it's exactly that? He's good looking and it's his dad and that's it?
Well, I mean, you're the evolutionary psychologist. I've heard myself that there are studies that show people are more likely to listen to attractive people, more attentive, more likely to prefer them. And I think we all know that more attractive politicians tend to do better, and it doesn't necessarily help your political case if you don't have, I mean, look at FDR, look at Reagan, look at these politicians that have, I think both the two of them had other qualities that were great, but their looks didn't hurt. I don't think anyone could argue that. I mean, in my business as well, like, looking good helps. I like to think I have ideas along with my looks, but I'm going to be the first one to admit, absolutely looking good helps. I mean, if I shaved my head, grew out my armpits, and gained 200 pounds, I don't think I'd have quite the same audience I would have. I just think it's a fact that I can't deny.
Do you feel that at the next election he'll be out, or is he going to be one of those multiple term guys? What's your if I gave you $10 to make that prediction, what's your feel?
Well, a girl that is actually a boy can dream, but I have no idea. It totally depends on what the conservative race ends up with. I don't think Kelly Leitch, if she wins, people are calling her the Donald Trump of Canada. I quite frankly don't think she has a shot at winning. I'm not seeing a big Conservative Party candidate that I think really has a shot at winning, although depends how sentiment around Trudeau goes in Canada over the next little bit. Honestly, too early to make predictions. Yourself?
I'm kind of confused because of course, Brexit and Trump, one could argue, are part of the same general phenomenon where the fulcrum, the pendulum is starting to swing the other way. And yet, I don't get the feeling that that phenomenon is happening in Canada. And so to the extent that I'm not seeing, no, go ahead, go ahead. Am I wrong?
The reason it's different in Canada is because Brexit and Trump largely had to do with immigration and a lot of economic problems and such. Canada is not bordered on a third world country. We don't have things blowing up right next to us. We don't have a border where if you live there, you're being called a gringo constantly and having your jobs taken. We don't have the same kind of urgency that Brexit had. We don't have the same kind of urgency that America had with their immigration issue. I think that plays into it a lot.
So you think that
honest.
there is an underlying cauldron that's there brewing, but it hasn't received the necessary triggers to create similar movements to that of Brexit or to Trump, from your view?
Unfortunately, we don't look at history. People don't read history. We just wait to suffer and then we make changes. So I think we actually will need to suffer more under Trudeau's cucked government in order to make the changes necessary to protect our country, protect our people, and to represent ourselves better, quite frankly, on a worldwide scale.
Within your circle, and again, one of the things that interests me in speaking to you, other than the fact that obviously you're an intelligent person and interesting to talk to, is that you are in a particular age demographic, right? I mean, one of the things that I try to do in my show is to speak to people from all walks of life. All right, it's not. I don't only speak to fellow academics because we are in the ivory tower, right? I speak to porn stars, right? I speak to NBA, right? I mean, anybody who has an interesting voice, I'm more than happy to sit and chat with. And so, from your perspective, as somebody who's in her 20s, sorry, I said her, as somebody who is in his 20s, is it? I mean, are a lot of your cohorts in terms of age feeling similar to you, or are you really the rare outlier, but everybody is enamored by political correctness and by Justin Trudeau? Give me a sense of where your peers are at in this battle of ideas.
Well, this is where the issue comes in. I find myself sometimes getting into my own little safe space bubble where I surround myself with politically aware people. I mean, some of my best friends are liberals, but they're still among the politically aware group versus the other half of my peers, which is probably the majority of my peers, who are more enamored with fleeting distractions. They want to watch the Kardashians. They want to watch their Netflix. They want to go get drunk and high and party and enjoy their 20s to the fullest and become a arts major student, whatever. And then I've got the political side. The political side of my generation is most certainly asking some freaking important questions right now. They're most certainly critical of feminism, and I think that's changed over the past couple of years as people have asked more and more questions. They're most certainly critical of the questions of nationalism, of immigration, of what is our identity, what is our culture. They're so aware to that. They're so in tune, and they feel very. And I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for a lot of the people that I know and speak to. They're searching for truth, I feel like. But then there's this other half that I sometimes forget about and repress from my memory, but need to remind myself there's a real world and the rest of the world that are just kind of distracting themselves from anything political, any of these deeper questions. I don't know how long that distraction is going to last. I personally don't think it's I find in the people I talk to that are like that, it's not a particularly fulfilling distraction, sitting and watching soap operas all day and getting drunk every night and worshiping celebrities and the Kardashians and eyebrows and Snapchat filters. I don't think it's a particularly fulfilling or meaningful life. And I think that eventually these questions of why can't I get a proper job? Why can't I afford a house? Why am I unable to date someone of the opposite gender without all of these very serious issues coming about due to gender relation problems? Why am I never going to be able to have kids because of my inability to form proper relationships and buy a house? There are all these questions I hope are going to come about in these people, and eventually they will become politically aware. But at the moment, not so much. And for reference, I'm 21. I'm not in my mid-20s, so I'm a bit younger than And a lot of people my age are still
21
YouTubers.
and so successful.
21.
My goodness, that's incredible. Good for you. Great job. I
Well,
mean,
thank you.
I think most 21-year-olds, as exactly as you said, I mean, are worried about where they're going to get their next. I guess they don't need a fake ID at 21. It's legal. What, I can't remember again what it is. What is it in Ontario? Is it 18 or 21? What's the legal age to drink?
I moved here 6 months ago, so I'm not too sure.
Oh.
I know in America it's 21 for sure, but in a lot of places in Canada it's 19.
Well, good for you. Let's talk about briefly immigration, and then we'll wrap up with any other projects that you want to talk about that are not yet public. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was immigration, and something that I've discussed with a wide variety of guests, and it's the following basically: how do we strike a right balance between our desire to be humane and let people in? As you may or may not know, I don't know if you know my personal history. We're from Lebanon. We're Lebanese Jews who escaped Lebanon, came to Canada, and so certainly few people would be as well attuned with the idea of having a humane immigration system or a humane refugee system than I am, right? I benefited from the hospitality of Canada, and I'm forever grateful to Canada for having allowed us to pursue our lives here. Yet, of course, I also recognize that letting in people who don't share any of our cultural reference points is problematic. And it's not just about catching the few ISIS members. It's about importing an ideology that is antithetical to most things that true liberals would find acceptable. So from your perspective and from that of your generation, how do we strike that balance? What's your sense of how we could hit that sweet spot?
Right. So my great-grandparents, I know people like to make this point a lot. They're like, how can you not be for immigration and refugees when we're all immigrants, we're all refugees? And yes, my family came from Denmark during the war. They wanted to get away from the war after having their trucking company taken away. So they were sponsored by Danes in Alberta and brought over to Canada as kind of refugees, quote unquote, from the war in Europe. But the difference is from what's happening today and what was happening before is it was a very, very different crowd of people. And the statistics show that. If people go and read the Fraser Institute statistics here in Canada, specifically on immigration, the cost of immigration to the taxpayer in Canada over the past 20 years has gone up significantly from the costs that were happening in the 50s. We're bringing in a different crop of immigrants. And if people watch the Fan Volume, they know certain places, whether it be the Middle East, Mexico, have higher costs for immigrants, whether that be because their women don't work and they have a lot of women and kids that stay at home on welfare. I'm not sure, but the statistics show this. So we're bringing in a whole different crop of immigrants. And I think we need to reevaluate the government systems we have available or the government systems. I think they should be prioritized for certainly Canadian citizens. I think we should certainly bring in immigrants that aren't going to be a burden on the taxpayer system and prioritize refugees as well. I mean, I'm not going to be a completely heartless person. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, there are a lot of Christians that are truly, truly being murdered and killed in places because of their religion. And I mean, whether I'm going to bring in the Christian or a Muslim family in an area that is oppressing Christians, I mean, let's ask them questions. Donald Trump asked this and was called a bigot. I think it was a pretty fair question. So I think there are things we can do to improve our system. Right now, what we're doing at the moment is not working. It is hurting Canadians. It is hurting our tax dollar, our budget, which is quite in debt here and in America and in the UK. So we just need a lot of immigration reform and a lot of putting the current citizens first. But I'm not the kind of person that is just going to say none, cut it off, done.
Yeah, I mean,
if you can come here and work, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is that you don't need to bring people simply because you want to. I know that this term is being overused, but to virtue signal at the country level.
Yes.
Right? Ultimately, it is perfectly reasonable and rational to say that we should have a maximizing strategy. In other words, it has to be good for the host country. Now, you might leave a few people that you let in under truly dire refugee. I mean, when we're escaping Lebanon, we're under imminent threat of execution. We're Jews who are going to be executed, right? The Yazidis, the Christians. Maybe there is some Shia Muslims who are trying to escape, some Sunni extremists. Okay, fine. In other words, but you don't let in endless people from those regions simply because they are seeking a better future. A country has a right to say, ultimately, we use our own. It's not selfish. It's called rational, right?
Yeah.
I have a right to decide who I let in if it benefits my society, right? And that would hold true whether I'm making that evaluation for Estonians or Danes or Syrians. It's perfectly rational, right? I mean, I get to choose who comes into my house or not as a function of whether they share similar values to mine, right? I mean, if someone is a pedophile, I may not let him, I won't let him into my house because I have young children and we don't have a overlapping feeling regarding kids, and it doesn't make me a bigot for not letting him in. Similarly,
Absolutely.
and you know, it seems to me so inherently simple to argue along those lines, right? Of course, always maintain a humane bent, but you don't have this God given responsibility to take care of everybody. If that were the case, then I should feel incredibly guilty tonight on a cold Montreal winter to be sleeping in a warm bed when I know for a fact that there are thousands of people in Montreal who are homeless. They should all be sharing our bedroom with me. Well, I share by paying tons of taxes, right? So it should be natural for us to be able to ask those questions without being feathered and tarred as racists and bigots, right?
Well, precisely. And, you know, it's the funniest thing because naturally, I've always found that the idea of nationalism, whether you like that word or not, is a very natural instinct in people. I mean, I think the first nationalist unit is the family. I mean, you could create a globalist family where the father and mother give away all of their resources to everyone who wants it. But I mean, your kids are probably going to die if you're giving away all your food to everyone else who wants it, and your family line along with it. The same goes for nations. If you're giving away everything, if you're letting everyone in your home and not treating your kids first, I mean, they're going to die, and so is your nation and culture along with it. So in our personal lives, we're very, very reasonable and rational. I need my home. I need my food. I'm going to lock my doors at night. I'm going to do all these reasonable things, not invite the whole world in because of guilt. I'm going to have some sensibility and self-preservation. But when it comes to the country, that's someone else's problem. I'm going to virtue signal because it benefits me right now to virtue signal about letting tons of refugees into this country. When in reality, if you want your nation to survive, if you want to have a happier life, if you want to pay less taxes, if you want it to live in a safe country, you can't let the whole world enter your country. It just doesn't work. You have to put the people in your country first. And I agree, that's not racist. I would totally understand if there were tons of Danish immigrants coming into Canada, creating their own enclave, bringing tons of crime with them and refusing to assimilate. If they said nope to my great-grandparents, that I'd look back and be like, that's pretty reasonable, you know? I mean, it's no different just because it's coming from the Middle East.
But just to be a bit charitable to some of these people, many of them may not necessarily be engaging in virtue signaling. It's often the case that they have a mindset whereby they think that if there are inequalities in life, those inequalities must be due to systematized injustices, right? And therefore, if somebody in Eritrea, through the accident of his or her birth, is born in Eritrea, well, that is inherently unfair, right? And therefore, if you're born more intelligent than someone else, if you have greater ambition than someone else, and you work harder, well, ultimately that's unfair because they didn't choose to be less ambitious and lazy as hell. And so it is a truly cancerous mindset, and ultimately it's radical communism, right? I mean, everybody should be equal because when there are inequalities, it must be due to injustices. So I think some of those people are actually not just virtue signaling. They really believe in the sort of kumbaya whereby, you know, I feel truly guilty. I self-flagellate. self-flagellate at the thought that I have something that the poor Gambian kid doesn't have, and therefore we have to create greater equality. But of course, life doesn't operate that way. There's a quote that maybe some of my viewers are tired of hearing me say. There's a great evolutionary biologist by the name of E.O. Wilson who studied social ants. And if you know anything about the organization of social ants, there's a queen and then everybody is an equal worker. And so there's very little hierarchy, right? It's a very flat organization. And so he said regarding communism and socialism, he said, great idea, wrong species, right? We're not meant to all be equal. All cultures are not equal. All people are not equal. But I think a lot of these leftist types do believe in that, and therefore they say it is racist and bigoted to not open the door for everybody to have an equal chance as us fortunate guys, correct?
I'd agree with that. And honestly, I think a world where we were all equal and the exact same sounds quite miserable. The idea of not being able to fail or succeed or strive harder or be naturally born different, I think that would be a very miserable and dull world. I realize a lot of people are quite big fans of conformity nowadays, but I don't think they'd like it much. I mean, I think we can all find happiness in our uniqueness, no matter how successful or unsuccessful we are. I truly believe that. But it has a lot to do with your character and the decisions you make for yourself. But we all have that ability, I think.
And I was going to say, I think the reason why, from their perspective, it's a nice mindset to have is that ultimately it's a hopeful mindset, right? If you truly believe that we are all born with empty slates and that with equal potentiality, and that it's only the accidents of our lives that either turn us into Michael Jordan or into a cocaine unemployed guy, well, then there is a way to alter that reality, right? You could intervene. But if you recognize that people are not born with equal potentiality, right? Not everybody could have been Michael Jordan were they given the right environment to flourish into a Michael Jordan. That's a less hopeful message, right? It's a correct position, it's a realistic position, but it's less hopeful than to say, give me anybody and I could shape them into being anything downstream, right?
I want to ask you, because I agree with that. I think that everyone's born with different potentiality. I mean, I'm never going to play in the NBA. That's just a fact. Even after switching my gender, there's a few more things I'd have to work on. It's just a fact. I'm never going to be able to do that. But I personally would like to think that a lot of us, most people, have the ability to achieve happiness and a sense of being content in the positions we are in. Would you say you believe that as an evolutionary psychologist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually was asked recently to offer some life advice to young adults, and so I had 4 sort of points, which I won't repeat all of them, but I actually think that one of the 4 advices that I had given is that you should try to find a occupation or a profession or a job that to the best of your ability maximizes your happiness, because ultimately, short of the time that you are sleeping, which already takes more than 1/3 of your life away, you're spending much of your time, much of your waking time in your job. And so if you could be fortunate enough to have a job, I mean, not everybody will find their dream job. I happen to have been lucky in that I always knew I wanted to go into academia. I mean, I had basically 2 talents. I was a soccer player and I was a very good guy with the books, and so it was going to be one of those 2 things. Not everybody could be this fortunate, but if you could always be mindful, and certainly this is relevant for guys of your sort of age bracket, if you could be mindful as you're making these lifelong decisions, that you don't need to be an accountant because dad and grandpa were also accountants, and it would dishonor the family if you don't go into accounting, because you're going to wake up when you're 55 and realize, I really, really hate accounting and I really wanted to go into art history. And so I think, yes, we all have the potential to try to at least maximize our happiness if we have the correct mindset. So for example, I know a lot of people who love to study, but for whatever reason they weren't able to go to university. Well, if some people retire at 55 or 60, what's wrong with you thinking about going back to university then? A lot of people feel ashamed, like I would look so strange at 60 years old being with students who are 21. But I tell the story of a guy at Concordia University, my university, who went back and did his undergrad in his 60s, then he did his master's, and then I think finished his PhD in his late 80s or early 90s. Now that's a true scholar, right? I mean, that's a guy who finished his PhD, and I think within a year of that, he passed away, right? So I think, to answer your question in a long-winded way, I think we may not all achieve optimal happiness, but if we're mindful of the constraints that we put on ourselves and we don't succumb to them, then at least we could try to seek happiness.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that? What do you think of that answer?
No, I'd agree with that. And like, I don't know, the whole idea is like, I hear a lot of people think you can only achieve that kind of happiness and contentness once you've hit the higher tiers of, I'm a 1 million follower Instagram model, or I've got all this and that. But like you said, we're not all equal. Not everyone's going to achieve that. Some people are going to be really, really, really dumb, and that's just going to be their genetics, and it's going to suck. But I actually think you can be really happy like that, and some people are going to be really, really, really intelligent, and they're never going to achieve that kind of happiness because of some of the decisions they've made in their life, like choosing the wrong job or something. But I think that the hopeful me, maybe not the as logical or accurate me, would like to think that no matter what lot you're given in life, you can still find that contentness with it.
Very hopeful message to end on. Before I let you go, are there any projects that you're working on of any type that are not yet public that you might want to give us a little sneak preview of before we close shop?
Ooh. Yes, I'm hoping to, man, I don't know if I want to tell everyone about this yet, but I'm getting a little antsy just being here in Toronto. I mean, I like being with my hedgehogs and everything, but I think I want to go back to the wide world and start going back to do some more Europe-style journalism for a little bit. So you can possibly look forward to that.
You're going back to Europe, you said?
Somewhere around there.
Oh, somewhere. Okay, you don't want to give a location. All right. Well, we'll stay tuned for that. Look forward to having you back on. Real pleasure having you. Don't leave yet. Are there any websites I should put, or I could put your Twitter handle? What else should I put at the bottom of the description of this clip?
At Lauren_Southern works great. Rebelmedia.com or therebel.media. Sorry, I always get that wrong. We did the weird .media thing.
Perfect.
I don't know why we did it. Yeah, those two work.
Real pleasure connecting with you, sir. Stay on the line. Thanks a lot, Lauren. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Cheers.